This picture says more than the history textbooks will write later. The picture shows the number one face of the country that has been dying for the past 3 years, and next to it is some person representing the spiritual class of the same country, which I hope will be revealed one day. The unconcealed and full-blooded smile of the two does not fit in any way with the state and mood of the country, which unfortunately they represent, which means that the pain and tragedy of thousands of families is not only theirs, and they do not feel any responsibility for it, but they are happy from the bottom of their hearts. For that, and more, they are delighted with the results they have achieved. It is a monstrous reality, a monstrous era. Those who see this and those who contribute to its continuation must also be at least a monster, otherwise they cannot explain it with anything. We have a situation where even the nation-destructive junta together with its spiritual class does not even hide its delight at the national tragedy. The universe cannot leave such a phenomenon unpunished, and the people who tolerated it and denied the slaughter of their own children.
In the Dagestan region of Russia, Muslim youths entered the airport shouting Allah Akbar and are looking for Jews. It is highly doubtful that there are no police officers in the area to try to stop these people, and it is impossible to imagine what will happen to the guns that will now be in the hands of these people. And what will happen if this kind of attacks happen not only in Dagestan, but in Moscow or St. Petersburg, where there is a large Jewish community and a large Muslim community. Russia may enter a deep inter-religious war if this phenomenon is not condemned and stopped.
Events in the Middle East require a revision of those lame truths that have led all of humanity into a single space of murder and violence. Therefore, I will start with the words of the most popular villain of the last century who now remembers the Armenian genocide. These are the words of Adolf Hitler, who thus tried to justify his monstrous actions against the Jews. Today the whole world is again focused on the Jewish question. On October 7, Hamas, from the Gaza Strip, attacked the border settlements of Israel and carried out a massacre with brutal murders and violence against children, women, and the elderly. The world was horrified, and the world media discussed the issue of the release of hostages, the situation in Gaza, and the political commotion around what was happening 24 hours a day and the outbreak of anti-Semitism with escalating Osmanphobia in all Occidental countries. They discuss in detail, but at the same time, in a somewhat chaotic flow, which creates the effect of a broken mirror. They almost stopped talking about the war in Ukraine, and the recent massacre and complete occupation of Armenian Artsakh was completely pushed into the far corner, just like the Armenian genocide on Ottoman territory for a whole century now. You have to be a very naive and narrow-minded person to expect beneficial political decisions from the powers that be for such a small, exhausted country as Armenia, which was and is ruled by vassals of the Kremlin, and in recent years, a completely corrupt cabinet with a complete lack of not only responsibility, but in brains. But on the other hand, it also doesn't take much intelligence to fail to notice the same lame truths on this chipped staircase of political and economic life. In fact, all the horror that is happening is the result of impunity, double standards, mutual ingratiation of world politicians and manipulation of public opinion, the butterfly or boomerang effect. For those who don't know, the butterfly effect is a term in natural sciences that denotes a property of some chaotic systems that have unpredictable consequences, and in completely the opposite direction. Into the far corner, just like the Armenian genocide on Ottoman territory for a whole century now. So, according to the butterfly effect, it all started in 2020, in Artsakh, where the full picture of today's events in the Middle East, Ukraine and, or else to come appeared. Azerbaijan with the support of Turkey, the involvement of ISIS mercenaries, Nusra, the Muslim Brotherhood, Syrian thugs, Turkish grey wolves and other international terrorists, as well as the use of Israeli deadly commercial weapons and under the pretext of the presence of Russian strategic partnership in the region, and subsequently, the peacekeeping contingent attacked peaceful, absolutely legitimate under all existing international laws and in accordance with the USSR Constitution on withdrawal from it, sovereign Artsakh. Only a fool would not understand that this attack was carefully planned and discussed by the leaders of the Turkish and Russian states, since a further attack on Ukraine was rehearsed in detail in Artsakh. But more on that later. Here I will not address the topic of betrayal and recruitment of the ruling figures of Armenia and Artsakh by the intelligence services of Russia and Turkey, as a result of which the region was surrendered, and Armenia itself was brought to the point of being erased from the map of Transcaucasia. Let me just summarize the butterfly effect. Over the course of 44 days, official Baku bombed populated areas of Artsakh residential buildings, schools, kindergartens, hospitals, set fires with Russian phosphorus weapons and cornets, and rained missiles and bombs on residents from Israeli orbiter 2M, Heron 1, IAI Harop, Aristar, Turkish Bayraktars. All prohibited types of weapons were used against the civilian population, and the number of dead and missing was countless. It's not that the world community was silent, it just didn't know about it. The world media simply turned a blind eye to the world leaders if they addressed the topic. It was cursory, superficially, without much discussion, without characteristics and assessments, mainly in the light of Azerbaijani propaganda and in the interests of their own states. Moreover, throughout 2023, within 10 months, Azerbaijan subjected the 120,000 population of Artsakh to a total blockade and caused a humanitarian catastrophe. Without electricity, heat, gas, telephone and communications, without bread and medicine, children, old people, pregnant women and their unborn children died from hunger and lack of medical care just because they were Armenians. The international community continued to remain silent. At best, state leaders, between their important affairs, uttered a few routine phrases about the call for good neighborliness and the need to deliver humanitarian aid. Others, such as Zelensky and Netanyahu, lavished curtsies to Aliyev and Erdogan, congratulated them on their victory and confessed their eternal love and friendship. What on earth did they congratulate Azerbaijan on? In the massacre and violence against Armenian children and women, in kidnapping, in the fact that, entering the villages and cities of Artsakh for the purpose of cleansing, Azerbaijani soldiers beheaded infants, tearing them out of the hands of their mothers, in the rape of elderly women and the execution of men who were put on their knees and beheaded, that they wrapped the residents of Hadrut in the Armenian flag and set them on fire, that they captured an incredible number of civilians, including children, in order to torture them? And the world community again did not and does not care about this only because each country pursues its own interests, seeks partners and prosperity. Both Aliyev and Erdogan got away with everything that happened to the Armenians in Artsakh. No one seriously or strictly condemned their crimes against humanity. No one took to the streets anywhere and expressed solidarity with the people of Armenia. The only person who addressed us specific words of sympathy and support was President Macron, against whom the entire arsenal of the Azerbaijani, Turkish and Russian media was unleashed. Because, according to their plan and propaganda, the whole world must believe and accept the version of Turkey and Azerbaijan that the centuries-old Armenian civilization did not exist, and this civilization and its cultural heritage belonged to them, the descendants of the clans of black and white sheep from the Mongolian steppes who committed raid on ancient Armenia and Byzantium in 1453 and settled on their lands. And here is Macron with his sympathy. After a successful operation, or rather, the completion of the next stage of the Armenian genocide, at which the Turks had already gotten the hang of it and got a taste for it, as I noted above, after testing all types of the latest weapons in a 44-day massacre and propaganda tricks, when it was possible to lie and to be sure that lies are perceived easily, a chain reaction detonated. Putin, screaming Crimea is ours, attacked Ukraine with the goal of liquidating fascists, Bandera and separatists, just as the Azerbaijanis assured and continue to assure the whole world that they would liquidate the separatists in Artsakh with cries of Karabakh is ours. The Russians committed literally the same atrocities in Ukrainian Bucha as the Azerbaijanis did in Artsakh, under the watchful gaze of their Russian peacekeeping presence. But such things cannot but go beyond local conflicts, especially since their ideological leaders with ambitions for world domination and a leading geopolitical role have the ability to conquer new territories. Moreover, in ambitious delirium they openly declare their intentions. while Putin, under the pretext of fighting Bandera, through the mouth of his propaganda henchmen, declared that he would conquer the European continent right up to the English Channel, Erdogan managed to make it clear that he would arrange Tehran from Greece to Central Asia. On this path, he has Armenians on one side and Jews on the other. And, since, according to Erdogan, Palestine is part of this Tehran, instead of developing it economically, politically and culturally, professional killers have been financed and developed there for decades. But, I repeat again, since no one cared that the beginning of the monstrous catastrophes according to the Russian-Turkish doctrine lay in the conquest of Armenia, the chain detonation reached its next goal. So the thugs of the Hamas army, again, like the Azerbaijanis in Artsakh, entered the houses of Israeli residents, raped women on the headless, mutilated corpses of their men. Jihadists increased their attacks and began to cut off the heads of French teachers. Grey wolves started hunting Kurds in European countries. The Islamist part of Russia has risen to the call of blood and is rampaging in the Caucasus. And all because the civilized world and its leaders, instead of squeezing the throats of people like Erdogan, Aliyev, Putin and the like, warmly shake their hands in friendly congratulations for their victories over such a people as the Armenians. But back in 2020, we warned that if they are not stopped, the time will come when they will knock on the doors of citizens of all civilized countries. President Joe Biden announced last week that the United States would provide $100 million of new United States funding for humanitarian assistance in both Gaza and the West Bank. As my colleague Danielle Pletka notes, the administration will channel money for Gaza from the United States Agency for International Development's emergency funds that will not be subject to congressional scrutiny. USAID, meanwhile, will not answer questions about how it will spend that money in the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip. What is certain is that Hamas retains authoritarian control over the Gaza Strip, and it is not possible to distribute aid without going through at least some Hamas structures. Speaking to CNN, Principal Deputy National Security Advisor John Feiner twisted himself into knots explaining how the administration had come to an understanding with Hamas about how the money would be spent without actually saying what that understanding was. That Feiner's comments came so quickly after the United Nations Relief and Works Agency reported Hamas stole medicine and fuel before deleting its tweets only adds to the White House's naivete. In effect, it is the North Korea aid debacle all over again. At the time, President Bill Clinton agreed to provide both food and heavy fuel oil to North Korea as part of an incentive package for a diplomatic deal. North Korea cheated, sending both oil and food to its army as ordinary citizens froze and starved. When the United States Government Accountability Office confirmed the North Korean cheating and diversion, the State Department blamed America for demanding too inflexible a regimen of control. In effect, it is the North Korea aid debacle all over again. At the time, President Bill Clinton agreed to provide both food and heavy fuel oil to North Korea as part of an incentive package for a diplomatic deal. North Korea cheated, sending both oil and food to its army as ordinary citizens froze and starved. When the United States Government Accountability Office confirmed the North Korean cheating and diversion, the State Department blamed America for demanding too inflexible a regimen of control. Making the same mistake twice in the face of terrorists and rogues is bad enough, but it gets worse. While Biden bails out Hamas, a terrorist group holding American hostages and with American blood on its hands, it repeatedly refused to provide any substantive aid to Nagorno-Karabakh, which is home to one of the world's oldest indigenous Christian populations.
Iran-backed Hezbollah knows this, and is keeping Lebanon's crises in mind as it plots the next steps in the conflict with Israel. As the war between Israel and Hezbollah's Palestinian ally Hamas reverberates across the Middle East, the risk of war between Hezbollah and Israel remains higher than at any point since their last big conflict in 2006. Analysts say the Shiite group could escalate if Hamas appears to be on the ropes in the Gaza Strip, 200 kilometers away, while Lebanese leaders fear Israel could choose to instigate a major conflict with Hezbollah. But with Israel warning Hezbollah it would wreak devastation upon Lebanon were the group to open the front. The costs of any war loom large in a country already suffering one of the most destabilizing phases since its 1975-90 civil war. Hezbollah has no interest in war. Lebanon has no interest in war, a source familiar with Hezbollah thinking said. The group did not want to see the country destroyed and Lebanese fleeing from the south as thousands already have, the source said. With state coffers empty, many also wonder who would pay to rebuild. Some question whether Sunni-led Gulf Arab states that financed reconstruction in 2006 would rush to help this time, given Hezbollah's bigger role in Lebanon. Hezbollah's clashes with Israeli forces at the border have been calibrated to avoid major escalation so far, sources say, though as of Friday 46 of its fighters have been killed since the Hamas-Israel war erupted. However, Hezbollah has also indicated a readiness for war, reflecting its position as the spearhead of an Iran-backed alliance against Israel and the United States. Lebanese politicians have urged Hezbollah not to escalate, though they have little to no sway over its decisions. The fate of Lebanon is at stake, Druze leader Walid Jumblat said, calling this perhaps the most dangerous phase he had seen in his political career. He said there was nothing Lebanese could do to stop a war instigated by Israel. But from our side, we must control matters via dialogue and advising the brothers in Hezbollah to keep the rules of engagement as they are, he said in comments to media.
The Velvet Revolution in Armenia ended on May 8, 2018. As more than once it was held with anti-corruption slogans. More than 5 years have passed, but we still haven't seen any results. During this time, Pashinyan's government built its own money laundering scheme. It is based on the bank accounts of Pashinyan and Hakobyan. Under the threat of criminal prosecution and reprisals, former officials and oligarchs transferred huge sums of money to various foundations and personal accounts. As of March 1st, about 1.5 billion euros had already been transferred indirectly or directly to accounts controlled by Hakobyan. Thus, according to the reports cited by the Armenian media, during the Davos Forum, Hakobyan was in Zurich and took an active part in the development of documents for the safe placement of these funds in Swiss banks. The bulk was transferred from offshore and personal accounts of people from the list below. Mihran Pogosyan, former Chief Compulsory Enforcement Officer of Armenia and Deputy of the National Assembly. Gajik Khachatryan, former Chairman of the State Revenue Committee and ex-Minister of Finance of Armenia. Samvel Alexanyan, large entrepreneur and former Deputy of the National Assembly of Armenia. Gajik Baglarian, former Minister of Transport and Communications of Armenia. Vardan Harutyunyan, former Chairman of the State Revenue Committee of Armenia. Gagik Tsarukyan, major entrepreneur and founder of the Prosperous Armenia Party, Deputy of the National Assembly of Armenia. The European political elite, the leadership of financial regulators, and a number of representatives of big business are shocked by this information.
In his speech at the Great Palestine Rally organized by the Provincial Directorate of the Istanbul AK Party at Ataturk Airport, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan thanked all those who attended the rally on behalf of himself and his people for supporting the Palestinian cause and bringing hope to the oppressed people of Gaza. Quote, "My brothers, you are such a great nation here today that you demonstrated it in a different way. We are such a great nation and state that neither our strength, nor our problems, nor our struggles are limited to our own borders. Tomorrow we experience the joy of the century anniversary of the founding of our republic. Today, we express the fire of our hearts in favor of Gaza. We will shout to the world. As in the past in Thrace, in the Balkans, in the Caucasus, every inch of the coast of the eastern Mediterranean, throughout Central Asia, South Asia, and Africa. Hey West, I'm turning to you. Do you want a war between the cross and the crescent? Then know that this people is alive, this people is standing firm. Who we were in Libya, who we were in Karabakh, We will be the same in the Middle East. We will declare Israel a war criminal. We are already working on this. I don't know if you noticed, but in Turkey one grandfather went crazy, another sick grandfather from Muscovy likes to meet with him. So grandfather flew to the rally with a Palestine flag on his chest and spoke of ferocious game. That Israel is an illegal armed group, that it is working to recognize Israel as a war criminal, that they liberated Karabakh and will liberate Palestine. And these seem to be already familiar theses, although not from him. But the old man went further and he began to threaten the West with the War of the Cross and Crescent and said that Turkey was the only country that did not commit genocide. Here I imagined the face of the Armenians and how admired the Kurds were. In short, even taking into account populism and general hysteria in the Muslim world, we have every chance of seeing a war on a scale that has not happened in the world since from 1939. Of course, this doesn't change much for us in Ukraine. Israel itself will also quickly go into the regime, but Europe with liberal and democratic values may be a little surprised if all multiculturalism takes knives and Kalashnikovs with grenades and explosives. People have become so stupid that the Islamists cannot help but take advantage of this. It is simply obvious, and only a matter of time. An attempt to pacify a crocodile with soy meat and classical music, and then place it in a nursery will obviously end.
Mayor of New York City Eric Adams seems to have a special affinity for Azerbaijan and Turkey. We will soon find out if that special relationship has overstepped the bounds of legality. A year ago, I wrote an article about Mayor Adams, who notoriously had declared, "After I retire from government, I'm going to live in Baku." The New York Daily News published an article in 2021 under the title "NYC Mayoral Candidate Eric Adams Accepted Foreign Travel to Countries with a History of Corruption." The article disclosed that Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams has accepted thousands of dollars in travel and other perks from China, Turkey, and Azerbaijan, three countries with a well-documented history of suppressing their citizens. Adams recently acknowledged that he had traveled to Turkey 8 times. In August 2023, he boasted during a Turkish flag-raising ceremony in Manhattan that there were probably no other mayors in New York City history who had visited Turkey as frequently as he has. In August 2015, the Turkish government paid thousands of dollars for then Brooklyn Borough President Adams to visit Turkey for 6 days, where he signed a sister city agreement with Istanbul's Üsküdar district. The Turkish consulate paid up to $4,999 for his airfare, hotel stay and ground transportation, according to Adams' disclosure with the city's Conflicts of Interest Board, COIB. The New York Daily News reported that in 2016, Azerbaijan's tourism ministry paid up to $4,999 for Adams to visit its capital Baku for 4 days, according to the borough president's COIB disclosure. Adams has held fundraising events for his campaign in the Azeri and Turkish restaurants Baku Palace and Alibaba in New York City. On September 19, 2023, Mayor Adams attended an event hosted by President Erdogan's wife Emin at the Turkish House in New York City. Last Thursday, 10 FBI agents raided the home of the mayor's chief fundraiser, Brianna Suggs, to investigate whether Mayor Eric Adams's 2021 election campaign conspired with the Turkish government to receive illegal foreign donations, according to a search warrant obtained by the New York Times. The 2025 re-election campaign of Adams paid Suggs' company nearly $100,000 for fundraising and campaign consulting services. Investigators sought to learn more about the potential involvement of a Brooklyn construction company with ties to Turkey, as well as a small university in Washington, D.C., that also has ties to the country and to Mr. Adams, the NYT reported. According to the search warrant, investigators were also focused on whether the mayor's campaign kicked back benefits to the construction company's officials and employees, and to Turkish officials. The City News website reported that 84 donors, most of them employees of KSK Construction Group, whose founders are from Turkey, had contributed over $69,000 to the mayor's campaign. However, multiple people listed in Adams' 2021 campaign donation records as KSK employees either said they did not donate to Eric Adams or refused to state whether they had ever donated, the city reported. During last Thursday's raid, The FBI searched for records of travel to Turkey and documents linking the government of that country and its intermediaries to the Adams campaign, seizing 3 iPhones, 2 computers and various files from Suggs' home. Investigators also sought documents regarding Bay Atlantic University, a Turkish-owned university in Washington, D.C. that opened in 2014. In 2015, Adams visited one of the school's sister universities in Istanbul, where he was given various certificates and was told that a scholarship would be created in his name, according to the NYT. Last Thursday, the New York City mayor, who had traveled to Washington, D.C. for meetings with senior White House, members of Congress and other mayors, abruptly canceled his meetings and returned back to New York City the same day as the FBI raid. The NYT reported the warrant suggested that some of the foreign campaign contributions were made as part of a straw donor scheme, where donations are made in the names of people who did not actually give money. Investigators sought evidence to support potential charges that included the theft of federal funds and conspiracy to steal federal funds, wire fraud and wire fraud conspiracy, as well as campaign contributions by foreign nationals and conspiracy to make such contributions. In July, Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg indicted 7 individuals who fundraised for the mayor's 2021 campaign on multiple counts, including conspiracy and bribe-taking and conspiracy to funnel illegal donations, according to the NYT. The FBI investigation has not targeted Adams personally. He said that he had no clear knowledge, direct or indirect, of any improper fundraising activity, and certainly not of any foreign money. But if it is proven that he had conspired with the Turkish government to receive illegal campaign funds, the mayor may have to retire in Baku or Istanbul much earlier than he expected.
Նյու Յորքի քաղաքապետ Էրիկ Ադամսը կարծես թե հատուկ համակրանք ունի Ադրբեջանի և Թուրքիայի նկատմամբ։ Շուտով կիմանանք, արդյոք այդ առանձնահատուկ հարաբերությունները դուրս են եկել օրինականության սահմաններից։ 1 տարի առաջ ես հոդված գրեցի քաղաքապետ Ադամսի մասին, որը հայտարարել էր, թոշակի անցնելուց հետո ես պատրաստվում եմ ապրել Բաքվում։ 2021 թվականին New York Daily News-ը մի հոդված հրապարակեց, Նյու Յորքի քաղաքապետի թեկնածու Էրիկ Ադամսը համաձայնել է արտասահմանյան այցեր կատարել կոռուպցիայի պատմություն ունեցող երկրներ վերնագրով։ Հոդվածում ասվում էր, որ Բրուքլինի շրջանի նախագահ Էրիկ Ադամսը ընդունել է հազարավոր դոլարների ճամփորդություններ և այլ արտոնություններ 3 երկրներից՝ Չինաստան, Թուրքիա և Ադրբեջան, որոնք հայտնի էին իրենց քաղաքացիներին ճնշելու լավ փաստագրված պատմությամբ։ Ադամսը վերջերս խոստովանել է, որ 8 անգամ այցելել է Թուրքիա։ 2023 թվականի օգոստոսին Մանհեթենում թուրքական դրոշի բարձրացման արարողության ժամանակ նա պարզեցավ, որ Նյու Յորքի պատմության մեջ հավանաբար չկա մեկ այլ քաղաքապետ, որն այդքան հաճախ այցելած լինի Թուրքիա, որքան ինքը։ Թուրքական հյուպատոսությունը վճարեց մինչև $4,999 դոլար նրա ավիատոմսերի, հյուրանոցային ծախսերի և տրանսպորտային փոխադրումների համար, ըստ Ադամսի բացահայտմանը քաղաքի շահերի բախման խորհրդին։ New York Daily News-ը հաղորդել է, որ 2016 թվականին Ադրբեջանի զբոսաշրջության նախարարությունը վճարել է մինչ $4,999 դոլար, որպեսզի Ադամսը 4 օրով այցելի իրենց մայրաքաղաք Բաքու, համաձայն շրջանի ղեկավարի բացահայտմանը Քոյբին։ Ադամսն իր քարոզարշավի համար դրամահավաք է կազմակերպել Նյու Յորքի ադրբեջանական և թուրքական Becky Palace և Alibaba ռեստորաններում։ 2023 թվականի սեպտեմբերի 19-ին քաղաքապետ Ադամսը մասնակցել է նախագահ Էրդողանի կնոջ Էմինեի կազմակերպած միջոցառմանը Նյու Յորքի թուրքական տանը։ Անցյալ հինգշաբթի հետաքննությունների դաշնային բյուրոյի 10 գործակալներ ներխուժեցին քաղաքապետի գլխավոր դրամահավաք Բրիանա Սաքսի տուն, պարզելու թե արդյոք քաղաքապետ Էրիկ Ադամսի 2021 թվականի նախընտրական քարոզարշավը գործարքի մեջ է եղել թուրքական կառավարության հետ անօրինական օտարերկրյա նվիրատվություններ ստանալու համար, համաձայն New York Times-ի ձեռք բերած խուզարկության հրամանագրի։ 2025 թվականի Ադամսի վերընտրության քարոզարշավի համար Սաքսի ընկերությանը վճարվել է մոտ $100,000 դրամահավաքի և քարոզարշավի խորհրդատվական ծառայությունների համար։ Քննիչները փորձել են ավելին իմանալ Բրուքլինի շինարարական ընկերության հնարավոր ներգրավվածության մասին, որը կապեր ունի Թուրքիայի հետ, ինչպես նաև Վաշինգտոնում գտնվող մի փոքրիկ համալսարանի, որը ևս կապեր ունի այդ երկրի և Ադամսի հետ, Ըստ խուզարկության հրամանագրի, քննիչները կենտրոնացել են նաև այն բանի վրա, թե արդյոք քաղաքապետի քարոզարշավը շահաբաժին է տվել շինարարական ընկերության պաշտոնյաներին եւ աշխատակիցներին, ինչպես նաև թուրք պաշտոնյաներին։ Դսերի լրատվական կայքը հայտնում է, որ 84 նվիրատու էր, որոնց մեծ մասը KSK շինարարական խմբի աշխատակիցներ են, ավելի քան $69,000 ներդրում են կատարել քաղաքապետի քարոզարշավին։ Այնուամենայնիվ, բազմաթիվ մարդիկ, որոնք նշված են Ադամսի 2021 քարոզարշավի նվիրատվության գրառումներում որպես KSK-ի աշխատակիցներ, կամ ասել են, որ նվիրատվություն չեն արել Էրիկ Ադամսին, կամ հրաժարվել են նշել, թե երբևէ նվիրատվություն են արել, հաղորդում է The City-ին։ Անցյալ հինգշաբթի տեղի ունեցած ստուգայցի ժամանակ FBI-ն որոնել է Թուրքիա ճանապարհորդության արձանագրություններ եւ փաստաթղթեր Ադամսի եւ այդ երկրի կառավարության ու նրա միջնորդների հետ կապված, առգրավելով Սաքսի տնից 3 iPhone, 2 համակարգիչ եւ տարբեր ֆայլեր։ Քննիչները նաև փաստաթղթեր են փնտրել eBay Ատլանտյան համալսարանի վերաբերյալ, որը Թուրքիային պատկանող համալսարան է Վաշինգտոնում եւ բացվել է 2014 թվականին։ 2015 թվականին Ադամսը այցելել է Ստամբուլի դպրոցի քույր համալսարաններից մեկը, որտեղ նրան տրվել են տարբեր վկայականներ եւ հայտնել, որ կրթաթոշակ է ստեղծվելու նրա անվամբ։ Անցյալ հինգշաբթի Նյու Յորքի քաղաքապետը, որը մեկնել էր Վաշինգտոն, Սպիտակ տան բարձրաստիճան պաշտոնյաների, կոնգրեսի անդամների եւ այլ քաղաքապետերի հետ հանդիպումների համար, հանկարծակի չեղյալ հայտարարեց դրանք եւ վերադարձավ Նյու Յորք նույն օրը, երբ տեղի ունեցավ FBI-ի ստուգայցը։ New York Times-ն հաղորդում է, խուզարկության հրամանագիրը ենթադրում էր, որ քարոզարշավի համար որոշ օտարերկրյա ներդրումներ կատարվել են որպես կեղծ նվիրատուների սխեմայի մի մաս, որտեղ նվիրատվությունները կատարվել են այն մարդկանց անուններով, որոնք իրականում գումար չեն տվել։ Քննիչները ապացույցներ են փնտրել հնարավոր մեղադրանքները հաստատելու համար, որոնք ներառում էին դաշնային միջոցների գողություն եւ դաշնային միջոցների գողության գործարք, խարդախություն էլեկտրոնային միջոցներով եւ խարդախության գործարք էլեկտրոնային միջոցներով, ինչպես նաև նման նվիրատվություններ կատարելու համար օտարերկրյա քաղաքացիների կողմից նախընտրական նվիրատվություններ եւ գործարք։
Azerbaijan considers the anti-Azerbaijani statements of the U.S. State Department officials unacceptable and will respond to any unfriendly step with appropriate retaliatory measures. This was announced today, on November 2, by the head of the press service of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Azerbaijan, Ayhan Hajizade. Speaking with Azerbaijan in the language of threats is not permissible. Official Baku will respond to any unfriendly step with adequate retaliatory measures, the statement said. On October 31, speaking at the U.S. Senate Committee, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken announced the need for additional funding to address the severe humanitarian needs in Armenia as a result of the conflict, and on November 2, the State Department, responding to a question from the Armenian service of Voice of America, emphasized that the United States supports Armenia's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and any violation of these will have serious consequences. In this regard, the representative of the Foreign Ministry of Azerbaijan emphasized that although the USA acted as a mediator for many years in the previous conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia, in terms of supporting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Azerbaijan, providing assistance to Azerbaijani refugees and forced settlers, the officials of that country did not have a decisive position. In addition, the representatives of the USA have never issued decisive calls to free the Azerbaijani territories from occupation and to withdraw the units of the armed forces of Armenia, to eliminate their puppet regime in Nagorno-Karabakh, which was required by international obligations, including the 4 resolutions of the UN Security Council, Hajizada said. According to him, the United States instead directed Armenia on the wrong path, created conditions for separatists to travel to the US, financed them and thereby supported the maintenance of an illegal regime in the territories of Azerbaijan. If the US had responded properly to threats to Azerbaijan, as well as to international peace and security, there would not have been a need to use force to eliminate these threats, and the issue could have been resolved peacefully. International mediators, including the US, the lack of any result of the actions and the continued aggressive policy of Armenia forced Azerbaijan to liberate its lands by military means, the statement said. Concluding the speech, the Azerbaijani side noted the importance of ending the policy of encouraging the aggressor state, Armenia, because it is a serious obstacle to achieving peace and stability in the region. If the United States and its democratic partners fail to stand with Yerevan and stand up to Baku, the broader consequences for the region could be dire. Time is running out to protect the rule by law from rule by force in Europe's southeastern frontier. Azerbaijan's takeover of the disputed region of Nagorno-Karabakh, resulting in the mass exodus of its native Armenian inhabitants and the dissolution of the enclave's institutions, signals a dangerous trend in the South Caucasus. Armenia now faces a dual threat of further external aggression and greater internal strife. Without support from the United States and other democracies, Armenia's democratic gains may be at risk, and the government may be pulled further into the autocratic orbit of the Kremlin. A predominantly ethnic Armenian region that has been an object of contention for centuries, Nagorno-Karabakh, enjoyed special autonomous status within Soviet Azerbaijan. During the final years of the Soviet Union, Armenians fought to secede from Azerbaijan, winning the First Nagorno-Karabakh War, resulting in the formation of the Republic of Nagorno-Karabakh, or Artsakh, the historical Armenian name for the region. The entity has never been internationally recognized. Over the next 3 decades, neighboring Armenia provided pivotal security assistance and economic access to the Nagorno-Karabakh Republic, and the region existed as a de facto independent state within the internationally recognized borders of Azerbaijan. A tenuous ceasefire held for much of that time, albeit with frequent skirmishes along the border. In 2020, the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War broke out, claiming an estimated 7,000 lives over 6 weeks. This time, Azerbaijan emerged the victor, taking large swaths of territory and surrounding the remaining Armenian-controlled regions, save for a single corridor with Armenia. Russian peacekeepers oversaw a brittle ceasefire agreement, which included significant Armenian concessions. 2 years later, Azerbaijan orchestrated a 9-month blockade of Nagorno-Karabakh, severing its access to Armenia and the rest of the world. Food, medicine, and other crucial supplies became critically low, forcing the population to live in increasingly dire conditions. Baku even blocked Red Cross humanitarian aid to Nagorno-Karabakh in breach of all international agreements. This was merely a prelude to September's brutal seizure of Nagorno-Karabakh, undertaken in violation of the 2020 ceasefire agreement. Azerbaijan has demanded that the Armenians choosing to remain in Nagorno-Karabakh reintegrate into the Azerbaijani state, with President Ilham Aliyev claiming that all their rights will be guaranteed. Given Azerbaijan's years of state-sponsored demonization of Armenians, the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh were not inclined to believe his promise. As a result, nearly all of the 120,000 Armenians living in Nagorno-Karabakh fled to Armenia over 2 weeks. The government of Azerbaijan has not only violated international law and established diplomatic agreements, its actions pose an existential threat to Armenia's democracy. If the takeover of Nagorno-Karabakh is not met with an adequate global response, President Aliyev and fellow autocrats will be encouraged to continue to use force to achieve political ends. There are growing concerns in Armenia that Azerbaijan may again attempt to use force to install a so-called Zengezur corridor across sovereign Armenian territory, which would link Azerbaijan with its landlocked region, Nakhchivan, which lies between Armenia, Iran, and Turkey. In addition to violating Armenia's sovereignty, this could cut off Armenia from its southern border with Iran. There is precedent for this fear. In 2021, President Aliyev even went so far as to threaten to install such a corridor whether Armenia likes it or not. Crucially, Azerbaijan enjoys the backing of Turkey, while Russia, Armenia's traditional protector, has been missing in action. This is due in part to the Kremlin's ongoing war of aggression against Ukraine and frustration with Armenia's westward shift, as evidenced by Yerevan's accession to the International Criminal Court last month in defiance of Moscow. During his speech at the UN General Assembly on September 19, the day Azerbaijan began its takeover of Nagorno-Karabakh, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan called on Armenia to open the Zengezur corridor. Then, on September 25, Aliyev and Erdogan met in Nakhchivan, where President Aliyev indirectly referenced a corridor through Armenia. This development would undoubtedly have wider geopolitical consequences. Armenia would risk losing access to its southern border with Iran, since Azerbaijan would have the ability to close the corridor, as it did at Lachin in Nagorno-Karabakh. Such a scenario could leave just one of Armenia's international borders, Georgia, open to trade. If this happens, Russia's interest in the conflict could be reactivated, as the Kremlin is reluctant to lose its South Caucasus link to Iran, which could lead Russia to increase its military presence in Armenia. External threats combined with internal tensions could put severe pressure on Prime Minister Pashinyan, who has steered Armenia in a westward direction since taking office in 2018. The sudden influx of an enormous population of refugees poses major political and economic challenges for Armenia. Prime Minister Pashinyan's government will no doubt face angry questions about why Karabakh was lost and must be prepared to offer reassurances that Azerbaijan will be held accountable for this outrage. Armenians will need affirmation that the government can provide for their security following Russia's failure to stop Azerbaijan's seizure of Karabakh despite the Russian peacekeepers stationed there. What's more, there is a threat that a deteriorating security environment could erode the government's progress in strengthening democratic institutions if illiberal voices can exploit the situation to win political power and restore Armenia's dependence on Russia. The democratic world has a clear interest in ensuring that Armenia's democracy survives this crisis and that Azerbaijan's actions are justly punished. To begin with, robust humanitarian assistance must be provided for Armenian refugees. During a recent fact-finding mission to the region, the Administrator Samantha Power promised 11.5 million in humanitarian assistance. This is a good start, but significant humanitarian assistance will need to be sustained over the coming months, and even years, to help refugees transition to their new lives in Armenia. The United States and other democracies must also prioritize programs that support Armenia's further democratic progress, including efforts to strengthen the rule of law, continue legislative reforms, and advance citizen-centered governance. Additionally, as Yerevan works to resettle tens of thousands of newly arrived refugees, support will be needed to assist them in preparing proper documentation of the human rights violations inflicted during their exodus from Nagorno-Karabakh. These records are vital to any future legal action against Azerbaijan. Washington and Brussels must also demonstrate their commitment to Armenia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Holding Azerbaijan accountable for its outrageous violation of international law must be the first step. Punitive sanctions should be imposed on Azerbaijan, including its senior leadership, making it clear that aggression against Armenia will come at a high cost. United States military aid to Azerbaijan should also be suspended immediately. In the interest of a long-term settlement, the United States and European Union should also dispatch senior envoys to Ankara to engage Turkey in international efforts to resolve outstanding issues between Armenia and Azerbaijan through political dialogue. Finally, the United States and its democratic partners should engage Yerevan in new strategic discussions, which include opportunities to deepen security cooperation, following the first-ever United States-Armenia bilateral military exercises in September. Russian troops will soon leave Nagorno-Karabakh, but their presence in Armenia will continue until Yerevan has reliable security alternatives. We must pursue a long-term strategy that reorients Armenia away from Russia and towards the community of democracies. Armenia's democracy is in danger. If the United States and its democratic partners fail to stand with Yerevan and stand up to Baku, the broader consequences for the region could be dire. Strong political, economic, and security support will be crucial to ensuring that Armenia can continue on the path of democracy and that autocrats in Baku and beyond think twice before pursuing further acts of aggression.